Mining for precious minerals can be a reliable way to make money in Star Citizen, especially if you venture off the beaten track to avoid unwanted attention. So, for those of you who've been asking to see more Star Citizen gameplay videos, this is for you. I'm Forrester, and in this video I give you a mostly real-time talk through a mining session with a rock mining rover, from loading the rover into the ship to selling that glorious ore. It's mostly real time, as in order to keep the video from being too long, I've sped up some parts, which are clearly marked as sped up. Otherwise, what you see is pure gameplay. And if this is your first time on this YouTube channel, then welcome. Here you'll find plenty of Star Citizen videos ranging from guides to reviews, so you might like to check out a few more, or even subscribe to be notified when new videos go live. And for the channel regulars, please let me know in the comments if this kind of playthrough video hits the mark for you. And we'll start this playthrough by exiting the cockpit of the Cutlass Black, which we've chosen to ferry around the rock mining rover. The Cutlass Black is a popular choice for this, owing to its fairly cheap price, easiness to fly, and a fairly large cargo bay at the back with a ramp for loading the rock into. There are plenty of other ships out there that can transport a rock. In this case, we're landed on a moon and we're heading to a vehicle spawn terminal to spawn in the rock mining rover. Sadly, in the current patch it's not possible to spawn the rover directly into the ship itself, so this step is currently necessary.
Welcome to the ASOC Vehicle Retrieval System.
This is a rental rock mining rover, which can be done for just under 5,000 Alpha UEC. The claim timer is 14 seconds, which I sped up briefly there whilst we spawn in the rover.
Your vehicle has been delivered to the following location.
Although it is dark outside, this is the moon of Aberdeen, which is a popular spot for hand mining. Hopping into the Grey Cat Rock Mining Rover, for this initial stage we're just going to load it onto the Cutlass Black and then find somewhere off the beaten path in order to do our mining. The reason for that is purely to avoid other players who, with the best of intentions, sometimes don't have your best interests at heart. I'm always a fan of reversing the vehicle into the ship because it's easier then to get out on the other end. Old habits die hard, as they say. Speaking of old habits dying hard, also switch the engine off when leaving a ship. It's one of those things that probably isn't strictly necessary, but it has become a habit to avoid ships or rovers flying off or rolling away without you. One other thing that I often do when I'm getting aboard a ship, especially in an instance like this where I've left the door open, is quickly check the F1 comms screen for the local ship. You can see on there a list of members that are aboard the ship, which means if somebody snuck aboard without you anticipating it, for the moment you can usually see it in that F1 comms menu screen. With the rock mining rover loaded, we're now going to head into orbit of the moon. From there we'll be able to fly down to the planet's surface, somewhere away from any other points. For the flight in, I am going to speed up the footage a little way. That's because it does take a little bit of time to fly into the surface, but you'll be able to see the route that we've taken. For Aberdeen, I've just picked any random spot on the planet's surface. That's because the moon is absolutely chock-a-block filled to the brim with plenty of Hadanite. It doesn't really matter that much where on the moon you go. As we get close to the surface, I'll start scanning a little bit for ore. There are different types of ore available. If you've seen my mining guide, you'll know more about them, but generally speaking, the hand minables are the same for rock mining vehicles and for the multi-tool that you carry on your person, and then there are ship minables for the prospector or mole, which have much larger ores. The hand minables comes in two forms. There are smaller rocks which are really more designed for hand mining with a tool, and then there are larger rocks that the likes of the Grey Cat rock can break up. We'll cover both of those in this video. One of the first things that I'm doing here is actually just scanning the rocks. I can tell with a mass of 0.84 this is a vehicle type mining rock. The hand minables are about 0.1 or similar. And so, we'll land the ship, switch the engines off, and head out the back. It's not a perfect landing, but it'll do. Quite often, the wisdom around Grey Cat rock mining is actually to spend a little bit of time and be a little bit picky with the rocks that you choose, in order to maximise the amount of alpha UEC you make per hour. For the purposes of this Let's Play, I'm keen just to get our first ore in the trunk, and then we can search for some better rocks later. The rental rock is a really good way to be able to make some money. The reason for that is it's very cheap to rent. For a daily rental, you can expect to pay less than 5,000 alpha UEC, but depending on where you go, sometimes the prices can be as cheap as about 1.7k. If you need to, you can also rent a Cutlass Black, which will then be used to ferry around the rock. The mining process is pretty straightforward. You control where the mining laser is pointed, and then the laser intensity, which is shown on the left-hand wheel. The aim is to keep the charge level in the optimal section on the right-hand wheel, that's the green. Not enough power and the rock won't break, too much power and the rock will break too much, sometimes to explosive effect. My preferred method is just to keep feathering the throttle with the mouse wheel, just to keep that optimal green zone. Once you've broken the rocks into smaller chunks, at that point you can collect them. What I tend to do is do the rocks in a couple of rocks at a time. That's just to save me a little bit of time when I'm in the zone for cracking versus in the zone for collecting. You can also see on the right hand side the proportion of inert materials versus Hadanite. There are other materials available, other minerals like dolivine, however Hadanite is the one that many players go for as one of the most profitable rocks to mine. And Aberdeen is fantastic for that. There's lots of Hadanite to be had, assuming you don't mind the high temperatures. Looking at the bottom left, 224 degrees Celsius at the moment. That's pretty warm. By using right mouse button to switch the rock to the extraction mode, we now just point and click, and eventually all of those little diamonds will make their way aboard the ship. You can see on the left hand side of the user interface the amount of cargo storage available on the rock and how it fills up over time. 80 CSCU is pretty reasonable to carry plenty of rocks, probably between an hour and 2 hours worth, but if you are wanting to spend a longer session, and risk the 30Ks of course, you can actually later on move that from the internal rock storage to the internal storage of your transport vehicle, like the Cutlass in this case. Sometimes it can be a little bit fiddly to collect the rocks. I find that one of the best options is sometimes just to point at the ground nearby and just wait. Keep the rock extraction laser pointing where it is, don't wiggle it around too much, and just wait for the rocks to make their way aboard. If that fails, laser off, laser on, and reposition the rover a little. think this diamond is out of reach, so we'll pretend it doesn't exist. But we might just drive up to get this one. A little bit of trivia for you, the Rock Mining Rover, ROC, stands for Remote Ore Collector. I do have a complete review available on the channel if you're interested, but generally I would say this is for players that might be interested in mining, one of the best value purchases you can currently make in-game for Alpha UEC. Once again, I like my reversing onto the ship, just makes it a lot easier when you come into land that you're driving out forwards. We'll hop out, close the back door and head back to the cockpit and fly around and look for our next haul. I've sped this up somewhat as I'm searching around and flying around. That's because it can take a little bit of time to find a good set of ore, especially for these hand minables because they only appear when you're fairly close, usually within 2 kilometers. So there is a little bit of flying around and trial and error. In this case, we've found some ore and I'm going to get out and mine it. This is not an ideal haul. It's more to show what you can find when you're out and about and help you to work out, actually, if I was doing this, what should I be looking for? Open the back door, climb in the Rock Mining Rover. Do really like all these different moons and how they have their personality. Seeing the scorched vegetation, that sun burning away overhead. Really cool. So as we enter into the mining, we're in extraction mode, we need to switch that to mining mode. But you can see these Hadanite rocks on the right hand side show with a mass of 0.1. That means that really they're more for the mining tool, the multi-tool sort of mining, rather than a rock. You can see here with just 16% laser intensity on the left, that's really getting this rock into the charge level. So these are the sort of rocks that you would ordinarily avoid if you were flying around looking for some rocks to mine. Trying to keep fairly low intensity because it'd be very easy with the power of the rock versus the size of these little minables to get into that overcharge zone and cause some damage potentially. And you can see from the breaking of this rock, the number of minerals you get from it is considerably lower than the number of minerals we got from the last haul, and that's largely because although that there were 2 rocks to crack each, these rocks are a very, very different size, designed for a kind of smaller person carrying a multi-tool and maybe a backpack to be able to harvest this stuff up. Next rock is broken, so we're straight to the extraction mode, collect these up, and then back aboard to continue our journey. Interestingly, for those of you that also have a Tobii eye tracker, as I do, I absolutely love my Tobii eye tracker. However, mining is one instance where I tend not to use it as much. That's because the eye tracker often directs the laser pointer of where to go. I imagine for many people that would make mining a lot easier. For me, my brain just isn't used to that, so I'm sticking to using the mouse, and I use my Tobii to look around where needs be. Once again, close the rear ramp and head to the front of the ship. You'll notice I haven't checked if there's any stowaways aboard this time. That's because we're so far off the beaten track that I think it's very, very unlikely that anybody could be out here, especially not with me not hearing them. Once again, sped up the footage as we look for our next haul. These are another 2 rocks, but these are more mining vehicle sized rocks, so I thought worth stopping for. You might notice on the edges of the screen sometimes as I'm travelling around and looking around, gets a little bit obstructed by the suit that I'm wearing. That's because for Aberdeen I tend to wear this huge, great big Pembroke suit of armour. You can pick it up for about 20,000 Alpha UEC at a refinery station, but it's particularly well suited for hot weather climates. It also has a very big, thick look to it, which I think suits the mining roles in game. So from the right hand side we can see that this rock is a 0.84 mass, which is much more the sort of mass you'd be expecting for a rock mineable. Started at 100% throttle to just charge the rock initially, and now we're in that optimal zone, bringing that charge level down and just feathering it to keep in that green zone. It is okay if from time to time you accidentally get into overcharge territory. I usually do just let it cool down, because similar to how the optimal builds, the overcharge builds as well, and the more charge you've got in there at the time of a rock cracking, the more explosive that experience. Interestingly, you'll also see on the top left of the mining UI just a distance indicator. The idea is that the mining intensity becomes somewhat muted the further away you are from the rock. In this instance, we're still in optimal range to be able to break the rock, so that's absolutely fine. Clearly, in any instances where you might be entering into overcharge territory, more distance away from the rock could be an advantage in terms of mitigating any potential impact on the rover. And then right-click, switch to that extraction mode and hoover up these little minerals. Sometimes this mode can get a little bit fiddly, just need a little bit of patience. It's usually worth it in the end when you're going back and selling the ore, especially if you're mining Hadanite. Incidentally, this rock mining rover can be a really great option for new players into the game, players with limited options for starter ships available, or even somebody going from a zero to hero run. That's because the upfront cost to rent a rock and a ferry ship tends to be fairly low, and for somebody who doesn't want to get into combat too much, perhaps you don't have the best combat ship, this can be a great game loop for earning money in the current patch in-game. As we reverse into the ship, you can see that Pembroke armour set, very evocative of kind of a mining experience. I suppose it looks a little bit like the sets that they used, if anyone remembers the film Armageddon from the late 90s, when they took a modified space shuttle up to an asteroid and were drilling away. Right, we'll hop back into the cockpit of the Cutlass Black and go out and search for our next haul. I do tend to run my ships where you can do the scan pings both in mining mode and also in any of the master modes. I should say scanning mode really for the Cutlass, because it doesn't have its own mining mode, of course. Seeing something down here, which we'll just explore. Sometimes the scanning can be a little bit arduous. Scan these rocks. You can see there's only actually 2 of them, which isn't ideal. I think at this point I'm ready to search for something a little bit more substantial. When I'm out mining, I do like to find some smaller rocks first. That's very much just to get something in the tank, so I know, there's profit in there that's made back the cost for the rock mining rental. And also just to get you in the zone for mining, because it is a bit of a skill in terms of managing that laser intensity. Got another group here, worth taking a look. Again, there's only 2 here. I'm looking for something a little bit more substantial. There's something on the horizon over there, I can't quite pick it up. Look at that sun glow though, and the kind of dusty atmosphere. Very cool. So by holding down your mouse click when you're in a scanning mode, you can do a more detailed scan and see what's in there. In this case, this is Aphorite, which I'm really just not bothered by. Depending on what you're looking to do, there's nothing wrong with mining Aphorite, but it just doesn't have the same level of profitability as the Hadanite does. Now there are ways you could optimize this if you were looking to, in terms of the scanning angles and things like that, and oh my goodness, there is a lot of stuff down here. This is the sort of thing that you're looking to find when you're out looking for rocks. There's a big selection here, so just quickly scan them. You can see it's a mass 0.84, so this is the sort of stuff that you'd mine with a rock, and it's Hadanite, so perfect. This is the Motherlode. This is what you want to find when you're out looking for rocks. So hop out of the cockpit chair, back into the rock, and we'll get out and break those. So for this trip, I think we'll break these rocks and then head back to sell. That's because I never like to leave it too long from being out and about, because the longer you leave it, the more chance of something like a 30k that interferes with your profit margins. But equally, the most efficient option is to be out and mining for as long as possible and travelling for as short a time as possible. Plus we've got, 14 CSUs out of 80 stored in the rock here, with all of these Hadanite rocks. That will go a long way to actually, I don't think it will fill up the rock mining rover, but it will mostly fill it up. So accidentally got into the overcharge zone there, that's fine, I'll just let it cool down a bit and just keep it in the optimal zone. It's worth adding, sometimes, depending on your own positioning, it can be quite difficult to see those zones versus the laser in the background. If you find that that's the case, just reposition your vehicle and move the mining laser somewhere different. You should find it a bit easier. So in this instance, just to help visually, because there are so many rock clusters here, I'm actually going to extract as much as I can straight away, just to help me visually see which rocks still need to be cracked and which rocks still need to be collected. As I get later on in breaking these and there are fewer rocks to see, I'll probably just switch to cracking a few and then extracting, and cracking a few and then extracting. I do find this can be a great gameplay loop to do while there's something happening in the background, like maybe you're listening to music or watching some Netflix, or I don't know, you've got Space Tomatoes podcast on in the background, listening to some Astro Historian, whatever it is for you. It's a little bit less intense than some of the other gameplay loops, I would say. So we'll break this next rock. This one's gone to optimal really quickly, so again feathering that throttle. And that's largely because actually when I look at this one, it's got quite a high proportion of inert materials in there, 40%, so that tends to mean it's got, well, sometimes means it's got lower resistance and less instability. That rock's broken. Right click, switch to extraction mode, hoover them up. Tasty. And then grab this one that flew behind us. Sometimes that's something that happens when you're in extraction mode, because it makes the little minerals fly to the extractor. Sometimes they will go flying around. That's why it helps to stay as still as possible whilst you're doing that. Oops, power critical. Gone a little bit too far there, but we're in the optimal zone now. So again, just feathering that throttle with the mouse wheel. You can see the throttle on the left hand side of these windows until the rock breaks. I think this is habit where I kind of reverse a little bit after I've broken the rocks. I don't think it's something you need to do. One of the interesting things about Star Citizen, it does foster a lot of habitual behaviours that probably don't make sense to people other than people that have lived through things. So for example, if we're on a ship in quantum drive, I would absolutely never get out of the seat while the ship is in quantum drive. It's absolutely fine to do that now, but back in the day it used to be an issue. In case it's not obvious, this is now sped up to 12 times. That's because there's plenty of rocks here, and since you've seen me breaking one, I thought you kind of know the process that I'm going through as we break the rest of these rocks. It's also quite satisfying in high speed to see the cargo storage of the rock fill up as we go along. Plus that sun is getting quite low in the sky, which suggests it's going to be time soon to move on. You might have noticed there I actually broke up 2 rocks before extracting them. That's because there's fewer rocks now left over, so I'm quite comfortable just to break a couple and see what's happening without getting too confused about all the icons on the heads-up display. Something quite relaxing about actually watching this footage in sped up mode. But we'll go back to 1x speed. So you can see that actually between these rocks that we found here, that's most of the onboard cargo storage of the rock. We're at 55, 56 out of 80. So there is still a little bit more space aboard if we were to find some more rocks. But actually I think with that kind of haul there, I'll call it a day and head back, load the rock up and get it sold. So you can see if you can find a big selection of rocks like that one there, that's the ideal. You find a couple of those, that will probably be enough to fill up the Rover, and then you can either load them onto the Cutlass and continue, or just head back and sell them as the rear wheel gets stuck in the ship. Alright, reverse to board, engines off, hop out, close the rear door, and then we'll go and sell this glorious Hadanite. So I have sped up some of the footage across this video. Realistically, from the time from loading the Rover up onto the ship to the time that we get to a place to sell the materials, it will have been about 45-50 minutes of real time. So what you can see here is probably a fair reflection of what you can make per hour with the rock mining rover. I would say between 150 and 250,000 alpha UEC is reasonable. Although, if you're lucky, I'm sure it's very possible to make a lot more. So here I just point up to the sky, get out of the atmosphere to be able to engage the quantum drive. And then to sell this ore, you pretty much just head to any mining station or mining outpost. Avoiding Dobbs there. There we go. We'll go to Hurston Dynamics Norgard. I'd really like to do a bit of a location spotlight on Norgard. I think it's a really interesting place on Aberdeen. There are some players, speaking earlier about things that are kind of habitual behaviours, there are some players that will see me pointing directly at a location on the opposite side of the moon to quantum travel to, that will think, oh my goodness, don't do that, because it'd be very, very easy for the ship just to quantum travel into the surface of the moon instead of going around it. That is something that used to happen more often than it does now. And then the advantage of the Cutlass as a ferry ship for the Rock is it's fairly easy to fly. So in a situation like this where I'm just doing some fairly low level atmospheric flight on the moon, I can just ramp the throttle all the way forward, close the distance quickly, and then come in for landing. In this sort of an instance, you do want to be mindful of other players. It's one of those things that always makes me a little bit nervous if I do see somebody else, because you just don't know what are their intentions. So I'm often very wary. But I can see here actually there's nothing showing on the sensors, so I'm happy to come in for landing. I'll try and make it a nice smooth landing if I can for you on the landing pad. Deploy the landing gear. Almost perfectly aligned to this pad as we came round the hill. A little bit of strafe just to clear those lampposts. And then gently down, nose up at the end. Engines off. Hopefully a decent landing. Let me know in the comments. Unless you think it wasn't, and then, well, I suppose let me know in the comments anyway. So for selling the goods, you can usually just leave the Rock on board the ship. It will show up on the terminal still as a ship within range, so you can just leave it on there. That's absolutely fine. I'm going to just close the door in case anybody else shows up. I don't want them walking up into my valuable ship. And it always takes a minute just to find the right building depending on where you are. I don't think that was it. Looking for the one that says storage. Here we go. So you can see actually the bottom left, 226 degrees Celsius out there, so it's a good job that we're wearing this Pembroke armour. And then into the trading and shipping console, sell. You can see our Greycat Rock on there, perfect. Hadanite, 275 Alpha USC each for just over 150k. I'm quite happy with that, considering, you know, I mined a lot of stuff in that time that wasn't strictly necessary. So, hopefully that's been an enjoyable experience for you, watching some rock mining as I try and get out a cinematic close. Please do like the video if you enjoyed it, but otherwise, and as always, thank you for watching.